Season 10 has changed quite a lot in the meta. So in this video, we're going to be breaking down the best and worst heroes in this new Season 10 Overwatch tier list. So we're going to be ranking all of them in alphabetical order. So if you want to jump to any hero, you can do that really easily. But before we begin, I really want to get to 100,000 subscribers before 2025. So if you could do a solid and smash that subscribe button. Plus, we're going to be having a ton of updated guides about Season 10. So you're definitely going to want to make sure you don't miss out. Smash that subscribe button right now. And let's get into the video. Now, the first character that we definitely got to talk about is Ana. And Ana is the most popular character in the game by quite a margin. She's the most played at basically every single rank, but it's unfortunate that she is not really performing all that well this season. Mainly due to the fact that Ana got hit with several nerfs, plus the health increase that really happened going into Season 9 hurt Ana a lot. Mobility became a premium, and there's a lot of new maps, like a lot of the Flashpoint maps, that Ana could easily get caught out, left behind, and killed over and over again. She has a lot of bad matchups. She really needs some form of bodyguard to keep her alive. I think Ana Brig is still really, really good in ranked, and you could definitely rock like an Ana Cassidy or something along those lines, but most of the time, Ana is going to be the target of a lot of teams. A lot of characters are going to come after Ana, and it's really not easy for you to stay alive. I think if you position really well, you're really mechanically good, you can definitely make her work, but she's definitely not going to be the easiest way to get value, and I think you're going to have to be playing above and beyond your rank in order to actually perform really well with her. But of course, she's a character that has skill expression. You can definitely still carry with her if you're good enough, but yeah, overall, I think I'm going to put her in upper B. It's unfortunate, but this is the lowest we've seen Ana in quite some time, and yeah, Ana's just not in a great state right now. But let's move on to Ashe. And Ashe is a great character right now, and has been basically for all of Overwatch 2. She's very reliable. She allows you to have consistent mid to long range damage output. She can consistently trigger the DPS passive, and her ultimate is still one of the best ultimates in the DPS category. Ashe is also really good in poke compositions. She's good against dive compositions. You can play her with a brawl. I think really the only comp that she kind of lags behind in is a dive herself. She can't help but dive a bit, but she's not as flexible as like Sojourn, being able to like go in and be proactive a lot of the times with her forward slide. So Ashe has to kind of play at like the optimal range and can't really pivot into an aggressive angle very quickly. Coach Gun's okay, but not nearly as good as some other abilities for that. Still though, Ashe is just always going to be like a great pick in ranked play. I think that she's one of the most underpicked characters in the entire game. She's just so strong, and I would highly suggest her. I keep suggesting her. I think she's phenomenal. I'm definitely going to put her in the A tier respectively. Now, the next character that we definitely got to talk about is Baptiste. And Baptiste, while he doesn't necessarily fit every composition, like he's not great in dive, of course, he's really good in poke and brawl. And really in ranked play, Baptiste gets so much extra value just being so hard to deal with. You have so much utility you have to fight through when you're fighting Baptiste. And in addition to that, Baptiste has great mobility, being able to take the high ground and the low ground. Like, think about the difference between Ana and Baptiste when it comes to survivability. Baptiste is just so freaking hard to break through his utility, especially if you're not doing it as a team. And in ranked play, you're going to get a lot of value out of people just not timing their engagements with their team. So if you have to go up against a Baptiste and you have to deal with all of his utility, you're going to lose most of the time. You need like team synergy in order to break through and whittle down some of that utility. It just doesn't happen in a lot of ranks of play. It doesn't happen in ranked in general most of the time. Baptiste is just in a really great spot overall. I think that he's really, really good at outputting a lot of damage. In a lot of ways, he's like a better Alari at dealing damage. And I just think overall, he's just a really great pick right now. I'm going to put him in the A tier. And the next character that we definitely got to talk about is Bastion. I think Bastion is good in some ways, but worse than others as we move over to the new way that Overwatch is played in Season 9 and 10. Really, Bastion has a lot of strengths because he's kind of hard to break down. And I think that there's some characters that just can't deal with him very well, right? Like he has a lot of sustain. He's really tanky, and he's really good at punishing a lot of characters in the game. Like, you can fight against Malgans, you can fight against Zaryas. And overall, I think there's places for Bastion, but there are also situations where Bastion just gets feasted on. If he doesn't have the resources from his team that are trying to protect him, if he gets dove in multiple directions from behind, you know, Tracer's behind him, Genji's behind him, there are a lot of ways to put Bastion in really uncomfortable situations where he just doesn't get to play his own game. And in those situations, Bastion looks terrible. So it's really about the situations you whip Bastion out and how you use him rather than him being objectively good or bad. I think that he's always going to be a character that you don't want to main, but you can have in the optimal situations. And a big part of the skill with Bastion is knowing when those situations are. You get to walk out, you get to get your value, but then you know when to swap off as well. I'm going to put him definitively in the lower B tier. He's going to be quite a bit lower than this, but overall, I still think he's B tier material. The next character that we got to talk about in this video is definitely Brig. And I think that Brig is super, super strong at especially controlling enemy distancing and protecting your team. So there's certain characters that Brig are going to enable really, really well. She's really good at enabling characters like Ana. You could even play her in a ball composition with a character like Zen. She's overall really good at combating characters that want to fight in a very particular effective range, like Junker Queen, being able to whip her away, being able to whip ball away, being able to disrupt a Roadhog hook potentially. There's a lot of characters that Brig can really shut down. She's generally good against dive in a lot of ways. And while there are some characters that are pretty good against her, like Ramatra and certain other characters, I do think that Brig overall is just a character that is bringing so much inherent value to a team that you're going to be able to get a ton of value with her if you just try to make sure that you're playing really fundamental, you're trying not to feed, you're playing good positions, and you're really just trying to protect your team and slow the fight down, and you're just going to win so many damn fights with Brig overall. I really do think that she's actually a really good pick, but she doesn't synergize with every support in the game. There's a lot of supports that she just can't really play with, and there's some compositions that she just gets left behind in. If you don't have people to protect, you're going to have pretty low value on Brig, in my personal opinion. I would say that she's A, but very low A. I would actually put her all the way down here. You know, I think she's above Ana right now in her power level, but not by much. And the next character that we actually got to talk about is Cassidy. And the weirdest thing has happened with Cassidy, where he's actually decent right now in a way that you wouldn't think he would be. And it's because, like, Cassidy has always gotten flack about having a pretty weak ability with his magnetic grenade. Overall, he can't outrange a lot of other hit scans, and he gets outranged by Sojourn and Ashe and Widow. But even in spite of those things, Cassidy's actually doing pretty damn well. And it really comes down to the fact that Cassidy can play in like a death ball or in a really tight-knit group and protect his team better than other characters can. Like, Ashe can deal damage to characters, Sojourn can deal damage, but Cassidy can force respect in a way that those characters just can't unless they're hitting crazy shots. And Cassidy's a bit tankier, harder to kill with his role added. I mean, he's really, really tanky and he can survive through a lot of things. So you strap a Cass onto an Ana, or you strap a Cass right next to a tank, and all of a sudden it's really hard to find these alternate angles, you know, these angles behind. And I did talk about like how Bastion has a weakness to flankers. There's a lot of other characters that do as well, but with a Cassidy staying close by, he can demand a certain amount of distance and respect that other characters just cannot. And at the same time, he's hard to be the target himself because he's so damn tanky. So those things kind of work in tandem to make Cassidy actually pretty good. Like, he's actually a lot better than he used to be just because the meta has kind of moved around him. I still think magnetic ability is like completely like the worst ability that they've ever introduced in this game. But I do like that Cassidy has a role in the current meta, and he's actually not that bad in ranked play. I'm actually going to put him, I think he's a little bit worse than Brig, but yeah, I mean, I'm gonna put him about here. I still think he's a lot better than people give him credit for right now. Speaking of characters that people don't value enough, Doomfist. And if you have kind of tuned into like what people say a lot about Doomfist generally, you'll hear a lot of negative things, and there are some negative things to say. Like, Doomfist has all these damn bugs, and his most optimal playstyle might not be the most interesting to Doom mains. Like, they would rather be a lot more free, but you don't get to really play free in the way that you're supposed to play Doom right now. But the reason that Doom is actually a really good character comes down to the fact that he can approach matchups fundamentally different in a way that other tanks cannot. Like, most tanks, they have a way that they play, and they can play that way, right? And it's like, oh, Mel's is so obvious. But yeah, like, Zarya, very specific, pushes in, applies pressure, gets charged, eventually tries to go for a more proactive play. Sigma applies consistent pressure on the front line. Like, a lot of these characters do like the same types of things. Doomfist can do different types of things. Sometimes he's diving really deep in a backline. Sometimes he's fighting on the front line and brawling and just cycling his cooldowns. There are ways that he can change how he plays, and it's kind of all filtered together with his insane mobility. And mobility is just an all-around premium. Having a character that has mobility and has the ability to change how he's playing, so like a Doom can kind of keep a frontline in check for a while, and then when his team is set up and optimized for it, boom, he can hit the backline really, really quickly all at once with a ton of burst, a ton of cooldowns, a ton of CC, and that type of flexibility is just not really there for a lot of other characters. Like, a lot of characters can't just cycle on the front line. Like, a Winston can't just cycle on the front line like a Doom can. Like, he needs to go and create space somewhere, either bubbling off an angle, bubbling off a support from their main tank, or whatever the case may be. Doom can just create pressure in many different ways, and even though he's not creating that pressure as good as someone else, like, him just cycling on the front line is not going to be as good as, like, another tank standing there and applying pressure on the front line. But Doom can kind of do like maybe 60%, 70% of the job, but then he can do another job that other person can't do. And it's about finding those moments, those pockets where you do what is the most impactful, depending on what your team composition is and where they're set up. That flexibility is really underestimated, and it's one of the reasons why really good Doom players can still exist in like every rank and the high levels of play, because they're really good at finding the pockets where they can play different sides of Doom. And I think that a lot of players, if they got good at Doom in the lower ranks, they could really take over lobbies in a way that you just can't do with other characters. Overall, I'm going to put him in the A tier. He is a good, flexible character. He's not easy to learn. He's not easy to play, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have the power to back up his placement in the meta. Now, the next character that I definitely got to talk about is D.Va, and this one might be a little bit controversial, but I'm really going to put D.Va up in the S tier. I think that D.Va overall is just like the full package right now in Overwatch 2. And I'm not talking about just purely for high rank play. I'm kind of trying to combine a little bit of all ranks. D.Va is just another character that's incredibly flexible. Like I talked about with Doom, she's really good at playing multiple sides of her, where she can be defensive, very defensive in some situations, anti-dive. She could be someone that peels for her team, or she could be the aggressor. She could dive herself. She could contest people on the high ground. And because you have all these different sides to D.Va, you can always play a version of her that's like getting some value. And I think a lot of people in the tanking role, they're really frustrated with like, oh, I'm just getting counter swapped all the time. I'm getting counter swapped here and there. I think that D.Va can be your solution. D.Va can be that character that is really, really hard to counter. And you might be like, oh, Zarya counters D.Va. D.Va can play outside of Zarya's effective range. She can play the high ground. She could take fights that are more advantage to her. Because D.Va has this mobility and this flexibility, she gets to set up ways to get value regardless of what the enemy is doing. And that's just such a really, really strong thing in ranked, where you don't want to have to constantly be swapping over and over and over again. I think D.Va, you could literally just play D.Va in most situations and just never have to swap if you're good enough at D.Va. And D.Va works with a ton of compositions. She works with a ton of DPS. She's really good at like just giving your DPS or your supports extra survivability to win a 1v1 duel or a 2v2 duel. And yeah, I mean, overall, the character is just really, really strong. She's consistently been really overperforming, and I think she's one of the best characters to learn if you really want to have a tank that doesn't play this counter swap game and is just really good in the meta generally across the board. I would definitely suggest D.Va. The next character that we definitely got to talk about is Echo. And overall, I consistently say that Echo is underrated. She's a really hard character to learn, but she's so strong for many different reasons. She has a really great neutral game with good poke. She can burst down people even through their really high health total if you get them in your effective range, and she could do that by either isolating duels on off angles or going in with the dive. And her ultimate is just freaking phenomenal. It's so strong, especially if you're copying characters that get instant value. Either they get their ults very easily and can protect themselves, or they get instant value with their abilities. Think like on a nade or something along those lines. And overall, really good Echoes are hard to play against, but this character is not easy to learn. I think that she might be one of the hardest characters to learn in the DPS category, especially like to get her to a competent level. But still, character is very, very powerful, and I think worth learning. Overall, I'm actually going to put her in the A tier, just a little bit above Brig right here. The next character that we got to talk about is Genji. And the first thing I need to say is, depending on when you see this, Genji doesn't have his double jump because there's a bug going on. At least I think it's a bug. If it's actually still in the game, then Genji is terrible, but it's probably fixed by the time you're seeing this. We'll have to wait and see on that one. But outside of that, Genji is still in a really uncomfortable situation where he doesn't really have the means to burst down a lot of characters through good utility, through their extra health totals. While you could be a bit more reliable in the neutral with his new larger hitbox, which is nice for Genji, and I think overall his blade is going to be a bit more value, especially when you're not rocking with an Ana, which you won't rock with her nearly as much as you did before. He's still in a situation where he doesn't play very flexible. He can play in a dive composition, and outside of that, I would not suggest playing Genji. He has one composition where he's good, and outside of that, it's going to be really hard because you need other characters that are going to be baiting out these cooldowns with you, right? If you're just going in at a BAP, every Genji player can attest to this. The BAP throws out an immortality field. You try to burst it down. He drops to the low ground. You chase him. He jumps to the high ground. You're like, all right, well, GG, right? But if you have someone else that can help you with this, a Sombra, an Echo, a Tracer, then it becomes way more viable. Or a tank, mainly, that can, like, create the space for you to operate. Then you're just popping off. But outside of those situations, yeah, Genji's going to be really, really hard. And there have been times in the past where Genji has been playable even outside of dive compositions, and I just don't think right now is one of those times. I would actually just suggest to play him sometimes, but have other characters in your back pocket, not be a Genji one-trick. But, I mean, who am I kidding? If you're a Genji main, you're just going to one-trick the character. But, yeah, I'll put him in the B tier just for now. Now, the next character that we got to talk about is Hanzo. And if you didn't watch my characters not to main in this season, Hanzo was on there. And it's really due to two main reasons. One, Hanzo's underpowered, especially after his one-shot nerf. He can't one-shot anymore, which was a huge part of his kit. If you don't have the one-shot, then he needs compensation, and he just doesn't have it. He's just relatively inconsistent and weak. And two, when you compare him against characters that play a similar playstyle or fulfill a similar role, like Ashe and Sojourn, he lags behind them quite a bit. And so with both of those factors, I would say there's other characters that you would rather play instead if you want that type of effect, that are just stronger pound for pound than Hanzo. And yeah, I'm just gonna put him in the C tier. Unfortunate projectile bros down here. But yeah, it is what it is. I would not suggest maining Hanzo this season. You can definitely still get him working if you're hitting every freaking headshot. But once people start to aggressively come for you, divers start to aggressively come for you, you can have a lot harder time making Hanzo work. And I think any Hanzo player that is competent or high level, they would admit that they could get to even a higher level if they were playing another character like Ashe or Sojourn. Next up, we do got to talk about Illari. I think Illari suffers from a lot of the same problems as Hanzo. There's other characters that are just better pound for pound at doing what you try to do. I talk about Baptiste just being like a better damage dealer, maybe not as much burst, but still a crazy amount of damage when compared to many of the other supports in the lobby, including Illari. And I do think Illari just doesn't really fit as of the post season 9 and season 10. Higher health totals, no DPS passive. She doesn't have the ability to duel like DPS do anymore, when before she was like just as good as them, if not better, because she could sustain herself. Now she's just like a DPS wannabe that doesn't have the DPS passive. I really think overall the character is rather weak. Yes, you could smurf with her if you're just like dominating people. But yeah, overall, I would say that she's a C tier pick. Not that great. Next up, we do got to talk about Junker Queen. This one's a little bit of a tricky one to place. I'm kind of split between A and B. She can be good in certain situations, and she could enable dives. She could enable a lot of different types of strategies, but it really comes down to the type of composition you're playing. I think I'm kind of leaning towards putting her at the bottom of A. I think she's really good. I think she's strong. She has a place in the meta. You're really going to want to make sure that you're playing her fundamentally different depending on your composition. If you have dive characters, you really want to try to engage with your shout to help your dive or apply pressure at the same time your dive is going in. But in other situations, like if you're playing like a random composition in ranked, I would say that you could just oftentimes use your shouts to set up your own cleaves and your own plays more than the team-centered aspect of the character. It's going to kind of change depending on your team and what they're doing, but overall, I think you could find a way to get a lot of value out of this character if you're good enough. Next up, we do got to talk about Junkrat. Oh man, Junkrat's always a weird one to place. I'm actually going to put him down here with the Hanzo. I know that there are some Junkrat players that are absolutely cracked, and they are capable of getting a lot of value, but Junkrat, the problem with him is he has maps where he's terrible on. He has maps where he's just super terrible on the attack side of those maps. He has matchups that he just can't win. And if you want to get decent at him, you have to be like incredibly knowledge specific about the character and learn all these crazy intricate things. And overall, Junkrat is just not going to be consistent enough of a character to be anything higher than C. But there are going to be little pockets of certain maps that he can dominate and really put a ton of pressure out there. And of course, if you achieve like true mastery of the character, you can definitely get more value than C. But I think most people would agree that Junkrat is not consistent. There's nothing consistent about him. And I think I put him down here as a DPS that can work in some situations, but if you're going to play Junkrat truly optimally, you would just have him as a flex pick that you pick in those good situations and not someone that one-tricks him all the time. Next up, we do got to talk about Kiriko. And yeah, Kiriko's great. Really, really good. I want to put Kiriko somewhere around here. I'm going to put Kiriko up here. And There's a couple of reasons that Kiriko's this high. I want to make it clear, though, that Kiriko doesn't have a high win rate in most ranks of play. So even though she's objectively this strong based on high-level play and optimal play, that doesn't necessarily mean that your results will follow suit, because Kiriko's value is not automatic. You have to earn it, and it's not always the most obvious value, especially if you don't have a coordinated team, right? Because the thing about Kiriko that's so good is that she gets to do a lot of different things while still fulfilling her job. She can be aggressive. She can take wide off angles. She can teleport and help a teammate when they're dueling. And she's just a really hard character to kill herself. So, like, those are all pluses. But a lot of those things require really good timing, really good mechanics, and it's just not going to be free. They're not automatically happening for you. Like, you have to earn a lot of those things. And if you don't do all those things really, really well, you're not going to have a good win rate on the character. You're probably not going to win that much on the character. So the character has the means to be really impactful, but that doesn't mean that you will be really impactful on the character if you're not playing them even remotely well. So yeah, I think the character definitely deserves a high place, and based on pick rate as well, you need to understand that Kiriko's going to be represented, probably a lot more than she should, but she'll be represented, so you need to know how to play around them and expect them. But if you think that this character, oh, high meta, that means I can pick this character and just win, that's the furthest thing from the truth, and you're gonna have a really rough time. Now, the next character we got to talk about is Lifeweaver, and yeah, I'm putting this character in the D tier. I don't care. I'm someone who talks with my boy the Sauce Boss a lot about his Lifeweaver escapades, and yeah, this character is just fundamentally flawed in a lot of ways. Like, Lifeweaver can be good in a very specific game where survivability is super, super valuable. But most of the time, if you just had a way to create something more proactive in a team fight, you wouldn't need to sustain that long, and you could just burst through the fight and just win. You know, change a breakpoint, kill a person, kill a tank, find a pick. Like, there's so many other characters in the game that can do that. And I keep saying it, and I'll keep repeating this point about Lifeweaver. Grip overall is just tempo negative. It's an ability that if you don't use it perfectly to save somebody, you can completely cost a team fight. Completely cost a team fight. And there's very few cooldowns that are like that. Like nade, if you don't use nade perfectly, you don't just throw the team fight because of it. If you don't use Suzu perfectly, you don't just throw the team fight. But if you use grip wrong and you pull your tank out of a fight and take their space that they created, you could actually just straight up throw a team fight. And even if it's done perfectly, there's a lot of other abilities that could do it better without removing all that tempo from you. Overall, I think this character is flawed. I don't really love the idea of a heal botting support even being good enough. Like, you make Lifeweaver good enough to be super, super powerful. Like, you just keep stacking the stats till they're insane and you make them good enough. Then the game is like a defense fest, and there's nothing that actually happens in team fights. Overall, this character is a D tier character, and I think that they need a rework. Definitely let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments down below. Next up, we're going to talk about Lucio. And yeah, I'm still putting Lucio on the S tier. Some people might really disagree with that, especially after his pretty severe damage nerf. But Lucio right now is not really seeing play because of his damage. I mean, of course, that helps, but it has more to do with the fact that Lucio is hard to kill, enables dive, enables brawl. So, I mean, you can't play Lucio and poke, of course, but dive and brawl are very, very popular right now. And Lucio just being a character that can peel, can deny plays from the enemy team, can enable his team overall to be more proactive, and just has a fantastic ultimate. His beat is still just really, really strong, whether you're using it defensively or aggressively. Lucio's just a great character that's fitting into the new Season 9 plus meta very well, and I don't foresee that changing anytime soon. And yeah, I think that you put him up here now in ranked play with his damage nerfed. He's not necessarily going to be able to just run around and duel people nearly as much as he could. You're not going to Reddit Lucio nearly as much. But that's really not where the true value out of Lucio came from. That was just kind of gravy on top. So yeah, he's still a great character. But I think, especially if you are playing him in ranked, I think finding people that you can enable with your speed, whether that's just a DPS or a tank, you're going to go a long way and get a lot more value than you would just trying to Reddit around the map. Next up, we got to talk about Mauga. And Mauga's kind of being held back right now a bit because he is like getting targeted a lot from characters like Orisa. But I really do think that he is just under the surface of viability. Like, in a world where we nerf some of these other characters, Mauga could just become amazing, insane, and really he is super strong as is. I'm actually gonna put Mauga all the way up here. I think I put him above Kiriko. I think I put him here. He might even be higher than that. maybe I need to move this tier list around a little bit. Sorry, Cassidy, you're getting down ranked to top of B. Yeah, I mean, Mauga is just really good. He's really good at trading resources. There's some tanks that he just completely destroys in the head-to-head, and because the meta is definitely countering him right now with Orisa shutting him down, I don't think you should sleep on this character, because in games that Orisa doesn't exist and his counters don't exist, he gets to run wild, and it's very easy for him to just kind of completely take over in the future. He can be played with a dive comp. He could be played more with a brawl style, and I think there's even room for him to play in like a poke style comp as well, though probably not as good. But still, the character's great. He's definitely going to be a character that you should keep your eye on, and I think Mauga specialists, people that are really knowing the character and really good at the character, you're still going to find a lot of success this season. Now, the next character that we got to talk about is Mei, and I actually think that Mei is pretty good, but there are parts about her that haven't really perfectly worked in the transition going into the season 9 and 10, mainly because you don't have as high damage with your icicles anymore. You're not going to be able to have the same combo breakpoints as you used to relative to people's health totals, and I think especially with mobility being king, right? There's a lot of mobility. A lot of people love mobility. If your character has mobility, they're having a good time. As of these past 2 seasons, Mei gets less value with her wall because of it. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be some characters that you play against that you're going to be able to completely shit on with wall. That doesn't mean you're not going to be able to get a lot of value out of Mei if you're really good with her. She's still really tanky. She's still really hard to kill. But her overall value on average, I think, has gone down. It doesn't mean the character is bad by any stretch of the imagination, and I think that if you're really good with the character, you could be really creative with how you use your walls, and if you're hitting your shots consistently, you could still have a ton of damage. But yeah, it's in a weird situation where I don't think that she is going to be that good on average, more of a flex pick in the certain situations. Next out, we do got to talk about Mercy. Mercy in ranked play is always going to be good. I've talked about this before, but characters that force synergy automatically become insane in ranked where there isn't very much synergy. What I mean by that is when we talk about Kiriko, right? And a Kiriko can teleport onto a DPS and save them and force a 1v1 into a 2v1 where your team wins, right? That's amazing and super powerful, but it requires timing. It requires you to have awareness. It requires you to be looking at your team and not being distracted with something else, which is all things that are actually really hard in ranked play compared to finding someone, attaching to them, and forcing the synergy. That's what Mercy does. She forces synergy, and a forced synergy is super strong. A forced synergy is something that gets you automatic value, where if we compared the forced synergy to like the optimized synergy, right? The optimized synergy would probably win, but how many times do you get the perfect Kiriko DPS synergy? It's going to be few and far between in comparison. So as people get better at those synergies, Mercy becomes weaker and weaker. But in most games of Overwatch, especially if we're talking about underneath the Masters rank or even underneath the Diamond rank, Mercy and that force synergy is so goddamn powerful, where an Ashe with the damage boost going to take over an entire game. It's just going to do that. Or an Echo with a pocket, you're going to take over an entire game. I think that these things are super underestimated, and one of the reasons why I think Mercy will always be really good in a lot of ranks, regardless of her current place in the overall meta. I'm actually going to put her here in B. I think even in the higher ranks of play, you can still find ways to get value with her. You know, a pocketed Ashe, Sojourn, Echo, Pharah. Like, there's ways to still get a lot of value with her, even in the high ranks of play. But in most ranks of play, I think you just get value because of the force synergy. Next up, we got to talk about Moira. Moira's still really, really good overall. Great mobility, really hard to kill, can survive. There's just, we talked about how mobility is great. A character that can pivot in aggressively when they need to, but can play defensively and just never die when they want to. There's a lot of great things about Moira, and yeah, I mean, overall, she's just a character that I think most players should know how to flex to. If their main isn't working, great character to flex to overall. And I'm actually going to put Moira probably around here. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't really know what the perfect placement of these characters are. I know they all deserve A tier, but this order could be moved around however you see fit, and it's going to change depending on rank and skill and whatever. But they're all very, very good characters in the meta. I don't necessarily think that one is better than the other. It depends on too many factors to make them better than the other, but they're all this caliber of a character. Next up, we got to talk about Orisa, and yeah, unfortunately, Orisa is S tier right now. Now, I might be the certified biggest Orisa hater in the entire game of Overwatch. I hate this character. I think that her design is bad. I think that she doesn't create good metas. There's a lot I don't like about the character, but what I will say is Orisa is one of the few tanks that give tank players the feeling of a tank, the tank vision, right? You get to walk into space, you get to claim that space, you get to stand there unfazed and not die, right? Most tanks don't get to live that dream. Orisa does. So in that regard, I feel like if we're gonna create these metas where tanks just get bullied all the time, then it's only right that the tank that rises to the top is the one tank that can't get bullied, right? That's just, I mean, that's really the situation that we have created, you know, with the balance and the state of the game. It's unfortunate. I don't like Orisa as a character, but I understand why Orisa's so strong. Very hard to kill, very hard to focus down, can actually create space and take space and hold space in a way that other tanks can't. And yeah, I mean, she's like the boogeyman right now, but it's kind of like if you make the entire world not able to have fun, they're going to find a way to do it, and that solution has been Orisa. Unfortunately, it is what it is, but yeah, I don't necessarily think that Orisa will stay this way forever. I would imagine that the mid-season patch will probably nerf Orisa, but for now, definitely have this character at the very least in your back pocket as a tank main, because if you're getting counter-swapped over and over and over again, you're not allowed to play the game, whip out the Orisa, and at the very least, you'll be able to have value and do the tank dream or live the tank, you know, hero fantasy. Now, the next character we got to talk about is Pharah, and I'm still a really big proponent of Pharah. I'm a really big fan of Pharah. I like Pharah a lot. I think she can poke really, really well. She can dive very well, and if you get good with her, you can fight enemies in a way that they're not really expecting it. Now, it's weird, though, because there are certain characters that counter Pharah that you wouldn't expect. Echo is really good at shutting down Pharahs. D.Va is really good at making it so you can't play the game when you have to play passive. So those are like the two things that I think can make it so it's really hard for you to play Pharah. And in a lot of ways, if you're really good at Pharah, I would say Echo is probably going to be pound for pound better in a lot of other situations. Doesn't mean you can't get value out of Pharah. And I think that the games that you're stomping, Pharah stomps them harder for sure. And especially if you have like someone that is creating a lot of space, like a dive tank creating a lot of space, and you could spam into it. You could spam into ball slams. You could spam into Doomfist engages. That's really, really strong. And then the last thing about Pharah that I'll say is Pharah, I think, is really held back by her ultimate. I mean, that ultimate is really, really rough. You could definitely get a kill if you kill one person, but you're like going to trade the majority of the time. And maybe if you could cancel it, like if you could activate Barrage and cancel it when you want to, it would be like so much freaking better. I mean, even if we talked about Echo versus Pharah being like somewhat close, their ultimates put them so far away that it's just nuts. Like, yeah, overall, I'm going to put Pharah, I think, down here. I think you could still get value out of the character, but yeah, not necessarily the same value you can get at other characters if you're good enough with them. Next up, let's talk about Ramattra. I'm actually going to put Ramattra at the top of B, I believe. There's nothing really that wrong with the character. He just kind of gets bullied. I mean, you're getting bullied by Doom, bullied by Malga, bullied by Orisa, bullied by Queen. I mean, yeah, you get bullied quite a bit. You can outplay a lot of these matchups if you're really good and you're good at your spacing and you know to poke at the right times and you take your fights when you can, you brawl when you can. There are like compositions you can make in rank that I think overall are pretty flexible around Ramattra. His ultimate's still really strong. He's still really good with Ana. He's still really good against a lot of characters. But yeah, he's not going to take the top place in the meta or anything like that. I just think he's good and versatile in the right hands. And he gives you what you need to carry games if you're good enough. But most of the time, he's just going to lag a little bit behind. Now, speaking of lagging behind, we got to talk about Reaper. Reaper, another character that I'm putting in the C tier. Yeah, just not really that good at doing the job of what he wants to do. Like, he's not a tank buster. I think a lot of people kind of misunderstand that. Like, Reaper is good at busting tanks, but he's really not that great. He takes too long to kill a tank. If you're trying to kill a tank and you're getting shot at by someone that is hitting crits on you, you're just going to die, or you're just going to have to get forced away. And that's really the problem with Reaper, is that he has to take an engagement fast, but he doesn't have the means to sustain through people focusing him when he is taking an engagement. So he typically has to run away, right? And then he has to reset his cycle, and his cycle's too long. So then you're like, okay, let's fight DPS. Let's take these duels. But in the 1v1 against a lot of DPS, he's just not really that effective. I think he needs a little bit more power to make him a little bit more lethal, or you need to make it so that his cycles happen faster so he could do more of them throughout a game. Because, you know, setting up, trying to fight, either getting the kill or not, fading away, resetting, like you have to do that over and over again. It's just not very effective overall. I would say that the character has places where he can get value, you know, Ilios well, and some of the other Ilios maps like Lighthouse. And there are some maps where if he can set up for free above an enemy's choke point, fall down, start his cycle really easily, then he can become more worth it because his setup's really easy. But on many maps, his setup is hard, and it makes it so it's really hard to ever get in position to do anything on the character. So yeah, I'm just going to put him in C tier relative to that. Next up, we got to talk about Ryan. I'm going to put him at the bottom of B. I know that he did get a buff with his Shatter, but it doesn't matter. This character is getting bullied by every character in the game, whether it's Malga, which you just can't really win in the 1v1, whether it's Orisa, who just doesn't let you play the game, or it's the many supports in DPS that just completely bully you. Ryan he's become a victim of power creep to the point where he's going to have a hard time. Now, if you're in, I would say, underneath the plat rank maybe, or gold and below, you can still make Ryan work and get a lot of value out of Ryan. Once people start to understand that they need a distance from you, they need to fight you from multiple angles, or they understand how to counter you, you're going to have a really hard time with this character, and it's going to be very hard to get value out of him. I don't think he's completely unplayable, but I do think that he's relatively weak, and as such, I'm going to put him in the lowest part of B tier. Next up, we got to talk about Roadhog, and Roadhog actually has been decent this season as a character that is rather hard to kill. He's not going to be that consistent at getting kills himself, but he's really good at countering certain characters, and he's really hard to attack. I don't think he's necessarily like an amazing character to pick or anything like that, but he lines up into the meta fairly well. And as such, I think I put him probably around here in value. I think he's actually an A-tier tank. He's actually pretty good at shutting down some other tank matchups. But as teams get more coordinated and teams find ways to really like combat the backline, he doesn't really do as much as certain other characters at kind of interrupting that and contesting that. And he also has really key weaknesses in him just being able to be focused down, focused, you know, with multiple sources of damage with that DPS passive, or being targeted with things like Discord and Anti. Overall, I think he's okay, but he's not great, and it kind of depends on the situation. But he might be a good character to have in your back pocket in the right situations to whip out and still get some value. And overall, I think his impact is actually higher right now than it was in Season 9. So yeah, I'm going to put him in the A tier respectively. Next up, we got to talk about Sigma. Sigma, I have to put in the S tier, and I will keep putting him up here as long as he is necessary, and that's exactly what he is. On Havana, on Circuit Royale, on Junkertown, he is necessary. That's it. You need to play him if you're playing an optimal poke composition, and if you're not playing a poke composition and the enemy team is, you're going to be at a disadvantage most of the time. I mean, he's just so good at controlling space, outputting damage, doing it with low resources. I'm actually going to put him, I think I put him here, actually. He's really great. Like, he's just such a good character, and I think every tank player should know him and play him because he's one of the few tanks that gets to operate on so little support from your team and still output so much pressure, so much damage, playmaking potential. You get to force enemies out of the spaces that you want to take. There's just so much good to Sigma. I think he deserves an S tier spot. He's just that good. He's just so damn powerful. So yeah, I'm putting him up here. Next up, we got to talk about Sojourn. And Sojourn's a little bit of a weird one to place because I think that she's still freaking busted. Like in the high ranks of play, she's still S tier. For most players, she'll probably be somewhere in the A tier. I think you can still get a lot of value with her without hitting consistent shots. But I'm putting her in the S tier because this character, what the hell? This character has existed since the beginning of Overwatch, has gotten a million nerfs, and is still, like, pound for pound, one of the strongest characters in the game, especially if you're playing her relatively close to her ceiling or even remotely close to her ceiling. She's nuts. I mean, she gets so much value from a safe angle. She can be played with dive. She can be played with poke. She can be played with brawl. She's so flexible. Yeah, I mean, just a phenomenal character overall. I'm putting her in the S tier. Soldier 76 is okay. I think he's on the lower end of A is where I'd put Soldier 76. There are some maps like Flashpoint that he's going to be really good in where he gets a lot of value out of legs, running around. He can take multiple angles. He doesn't necessarily fit every composition perfectly. I think there's other characters that do his job a bit better regardless of the composition he's in. Not really that great in poke. There are better characters that I think fulfill his role in a brawl, characters that have higher burst. And in dive, I think more like legit dive characters that go all in and can fight from multiple angles are a bit better, but he's fine in all these compositions. Like, he's fine. And in ranked play, there's going to be situations where it doesn't really matter about the composition. It just matters about you individually, and Soldier can output a lot of damage and pressure and value by himself. He's very independent. There's a lot to like about this character, and I think all in all, he deserves an A-tier spot. Next up, we got to talk about Sombra, and Sombra I'm going to put in the high B. I could see an argument for putting her in the A, because she's good in a lot of the compositions that are seeing play. We did see a slight nerf to the character, but overall, I think the character is still really strong, especially if you're playing her with the dive composition and you have people that can follow up on your hacks, on your value, on your info, on your engagement. Then Sombra can be unstoppable. But she's similar to Genji in that way, where like if you're not playing her in the optimal composition, she feels pretty poor, especially because Sombra feels like she has to go all in a lot. Her new version feels like you have to commit to things a lot. And committing to things when you're facing a ton of utility is just going to get you killed. So overall, I think the character is good, needs a specific composition, but I think she's better than Genji in those compositions, even if it's only just narrowly. But still, I think also Genji Sombra, a great combo. But yeah, I'm going to put her in the upper tiers of B. Sim is hard to place, if I'm being honest with you, because she doesn't see a ton of play. And when she does, I think it's kind of skewed because only people that really know how to use her, you know, play with her that much. I think she has potential to be good, but it's hard to get the synergies out. I don't know. I'm going to put her in the low B. I don't really think that she's particularly that good unless you have synergy with your team and everyone's on the same page and playing around you, which I don't think happens that much in ranked. If you become really, really good at Sim, though, you could definitely make some really cool plays because you can play a defensive style, a TP bomb, dive style. You can kind of play both sides of the field. And Sim's ultimate is still, like, one of the best ultimates in the game. So, like, yeah, I'm going to put her low B. Definitely let me know, Sim mains, how you feel about this placement. Do you think that she deserves a higher placement or a lower one? Let me know your reason why in the comments down below. Next up, we got to talk about Torb. Torb is still a beast, man. Torb is a beast. I'm putting him in the A tier. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Torb is just, he's so good at outputting tons of damage. I think he's good in a poke. I think he's good in a brawl. He's good as anti-dive. And, yeah, his turret's triggering that DPS passive non-stop. He's really, really hard to mess with. I think he's a bit underrated, honestly. Torb is really good. He has good matchups against most of the DPS, I think. And he also is really good at bullying a lot of tanks. Yeah, I'm going to put him in the A tier. Pretty solid. I think the worst thing about him overall is his ultimate. But if he had a better ultimate, I think he'd be a little bit too good. So, yeah, I'm putting him here. Next up, we got to talk about Tracer. Tracer, I'm still putting in the S tier. And similar to the Sojourn problem where, like, Tracer might not be S tier for every single rank. But, like, respective to what is seeing play, like, actual meta play, I need to put her up here. And she also has the potential to dominate at every rank if you get good at her, which I highly suggest. I have Tracer guides. You can definitely go check them out. Subscribe and check them out down below. But overall, Tracer, even with the recall nerf, it didn't stop Tracer from, you know, doing what Tracer does, which is be very flexible, pound for pound trade resources better than any other character in the game, and can target weaknesses in the enemy team, right? And that goes up. The better and better people get at Tracer, the better and better they get at doing these things. And yeah, Tracer is just phenomenal at those things. She can be played in a dive composition is where she's probably best. But the thing about Tracer is that she can play in any composition because she's so good at trading resources favorably with other people in a way that Genji and Sombra cannot. And that's why these characters are in B, Tracer's in S, because Tracer can play the comps that these characters can play in just as well as those characters, but then also many other comps. In fact, you can play Tracer in any single comp and you can get value with her. I'm definitely putting her in S tier respective to that. Yes, she's a little bit weaker than she was before, but yeah, still. Fantastic character. Definitely deserving of an S tier spot. Next up, we do got to talk about Venture. And Venture, of course, is a little bit hard to place because they're new, right? But still, Venture is a character that has shown a lot of promise, a lot of potential, really pressuring from angles that other characters can't really pressure, has burst potential, I think plays in a dive and a brawl, and maybe even a poke, so flexible. There's a lot to like about Venture, and initially, it seems that Venture has a lot of potential to see a lot of meta play. I'm actually going to put them in A tier, and I could imagine that they either become cemented somewhere in the middle of A, or they kind of reside at the top of B. But yeah, still a great character. Definitely worth the percentage points to learn now because a lot of people don't know how to play against a Venture. And definitely let me know down below if you want to see a Venture guide, and I can break that down for you. Next up, we do got to talk about Widowmaker. This is another character that's kind of hard to place because I think in most ranks of play, Widowmaker is probably unplayable. But as people get really good with Widowmaker, she becomes completely dominant, and it's been like that for a while. And it's definitely true now. I think Widowmaker is better than they have been in a long time. I'm actually going to put Widowmaker in... this is hard. I think Widowmaker is really good, though. Like, actually really good. I'm going to put Widow here. I think Widow is an A tier character. Really strong. Has the potential to carry games, especially if you can hit your shots on these closer angles Of course, you're not going to have the max distance anymore, but a lot of times people already have damage on them, or you could take a slightly more aggressive angle. And yeah, I mean, there's no character that can really change the course of a game like Widow. And then there's some maps, like a lot of the sniper maps, that I think Widow is just absolutely necessary if you're in, like, you know, Masters Plus or Diamond Plus. I'm going to put her in the A tier, and I think she deserves it. Really, really strong, and definitely one of the better characters in the game. Next up, we got to talk about Winston, and I think I could justify Winston S. It's a little tricky here. What do I put Winston? It depends on what rank we're talking about. I know it's kind of weird. I think I'm putting him in the S, but really for most players, he would probably be somewhere around like low A, right? It's kind of hard to place him a little bit because he definitely is going to have a place in like the true meta of the game, the dive meta of the game, the high rank meta, the pro meta. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be the easiest character to work in most lobbies, right? Because he needs synergy. He demands it. His bubble demands space, creates space for divers. Playing Winston outside of like a coordinated dive is like miserable. Most Winston players can admit to that, and it's gonna be kind of hard to justify this S tier ranking in most ranked lobbies, but he does have that potential. So it's really on you whether or not you want to get really good at Winston and find situations where you can kind of force his value, or if you want to set up a duo trio and try to like create those synergies yourself. But I do think that you need some sort of synergy with Winston to get the peak value with him. So I'm putting him low S. It kind of feels a little painful. Maybe I should put him A, but I'm just going to put him there, and we'll talk about it later. Next up, we got to talk about Hammond. I think a lot of this guy's problems haven't been solved. Like, they really haven't been solved as of the change. It looked kind of appealing at first glance, but hasn't really played out that way. I'm actually going to put Ball here. Fine character, can definitely still get a lot of value on the character. Same as you could for a while. Still gets shut down by CC rather hard, can be easy to counter. I don't really think that the changes fundamentally fix the character at all, and the character is definitely not overpowered by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, I think B is perfectly fine. Definitely more changes need to happen to this character if you want to make this character viable. But they're in this weird spot where they either don't buff the survivability of the character that much to the point where the character can get shut down by counters, right? Or you buff him so much that he can sustain through counters, and then nothing else can deal anything to him. Nothing else can fight him at all. So it's like being in a rock and a hard place, and I don't really know what the solution is. But that's kind of the problem with a lot of tanks as we go into 5v5. So yeah, anyways, maybe I'm listening to Sam too much, but it is what it is. Next up, we do got to talk about Zarya. I think Zarya is actually good. I'm going to put Zarya at the top of B. Not very flexible of a character, as in you can't play her in every composition, but when she's good, she's really good. There are definitely going to be counters to the character that can be frustrating to deal with, but overall, I think that Zarya is a great character to climb ranked with. Really, really strong in the situation she is good in. Gives you a lot of agency over your wins and losses, and is just pound for pound really strong against some of the stronger characters in the game right now. You can be really, really strong against Roadhog. You can be really, really strong against Orisa. You know, you're good against bad divas. And yeah, I'm going to put her in the upper B tier overall. Last but certainly not least, we have Zenyatta. I think this character is fantastic. Really, really good. I'm actually going to put Zenyatta right here. Zenyatta's great. Zenyatta's really good. He's definitely going to get targeted, and he has weaknesses similar to Ana on a lot of the maps that Ana kind of gets lagged behind, and he doesn't have mobility, right? But I think the payoff, the reward for Zen is higher. Consistent damage output, pick potential, the ability to absolutely dominate the tank 1v1. There are just so many things that make Zen more worth it that I think it puts him in a tier above Ana, even if they have similar weaknesses, right? But yeah, wrapping up this video, this is the season 10 tier list. Definitely let me know if you think I misplaced any of the characters and why in the comments down below, and please smash that subscribe button for so much more season 10 content. If you really want to level up your gameplay, you're definitely going to want to check it out. But thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.